From money for the Low Battery to the proposed Ashley River Bike and Pedestrian Bridge, I sit down exclusively with Charleston mayoral candidate Gary White for the special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Gary White, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks, Quintin. Appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. Let me jump into the issues. As you know, Charleston City Council last week voted to apply for a $32 million grant from the State Infrastructure Bank for the Low Battery. If the SIP says yes to the grant, they basically will give you all extra funding for flood mitigation. If you were a mayor today, would you add more money to that request or add less to it?
Well, I think, we certainly would always ask for what we think we can reasonably expect to get. And we don't want to make requests to the SIB that are so large that they look at that and say, that's just unreasonable. We've got only a pot of money to spread across the entire state. But at the same time, we do have some very significant projects that need funding and that do, I think, need the help of the SIB in order to accomplish those. So I do think the opportunity that we did to submit the grant request to the SIB for the Low Battery, hopefully they'll look kindly upon that and favorably. We also submitted a request for some additional funding to amend the existing contract for Spring-Fishburne, which is tremendously important. It's $40 million currently over budget. And it's unfortunately, but it's a $150 million project that only works right now at low tide. So we really, really need to get funding for all those projects, truth be told.
Communication. How would you communicate this plan to City Council and the media if you were a mayor today?
Sure. So communication is critical. And I've learned over time in my business career and really in my political career as well, that communication is the most important thing. You've got to communicate thoroughly. Regularly, and you've got to have conversations with your colleagues on council, particularly to make sure that they understand what it is that you wish to accomplish, how you wish to accomplish it, and ultimately what impact it will have for their districts, and ultimately what support you need from them to get it done. So if I were mayor today and had the opportunity to really have had these bids submitted, the first thing I would have done was to sit down with Public Service Committee, many of those who are also, of course, it's a committee of City Council, and begin having conversations with the chairman and then subsequently members one-on-one to let them know, this is my expectations, this is where we're at, we have significant shortfalls in this project, we need to accomplish these projects, and here's how I want to move forward and proceed, and this is why I need your help. And that takes time. You've got to be willing to spend the time, and it's not just a quick 5-minute phone call. That's a sit-down meeting one-on-one with each council member and walk through it with them. And then subsequently after that, then you bring the media in once you've had that conversation, and you make sure that the media understands exactly what it is that you wish to accomplish, why you want to accomplish it, and how you perceive that you will move forward.
You talk about planning. How much fiscal planning would you use as mayor to really restart the funding contract for the Spring-Fishburne project?
Right. So we've been doing a lot of planning already. As member, I'm the chairman of Ways and Means, and as if you've been to council before, you've probably seen we've had a significant amount of debate on this issue. And we've also convened the Ad Hoc Budget Committee, which is a committee of several members of council, including myself, to begin having those exact conversations. We're already in that process. We're having those dialogues now. What we do find, though, is that still today we don't have a funding source that's an immediate opportunity for shoring up the shortfall for Spring-Fishburne. And the problem with that is that as it currently stands, in order to fund that shortfall, at least through the next phase, which is ending phase 4, we still have to take a significant amount of funding from the drainage fund itself to do that. The problem with that is that is also a limited bucket of money to be able to use towards other projects. So if we have to take all the funding from that, that means we won't have resources to do other projects that we're identifying. So we've got a lot of work to do. We had a group come in from Charlotte who helped us go through an exercise of really identifying what some opportunities may be. We'll need to continue to engage with them. I do think that we're getting closer to identifying ways that we can move forward, but we still got a lot of work to do. And we need to have someone who has a really strong financial acumen, who's in in the seat as mayor at City Hall to be able to understand how to move this ball forward. This is very, very critical and important to our city. And if we don't have somebody who has a good, strong financial acumen, we're not going to be able to do what we need to do and take care of our city.
This might be a difficult question, but how many of the overruns from the Spring-Fishburne project would you go and put towards the low battery?
Well, so today, the low battery itself actually has a funding source.
Okay. That's
the good news. And we have actually been setting aside resources over the last several years to go towards this project, specifically with the accommodations and hospitality tourism-driven resources is where a lot of those funds have come from. And so we actually already got a set of resources to be able to use to go towards that project. It's a $64 million project, and of which 23 has already been funded. So the expectation, and that what I had given direction to our financial staff at our last Ways and Means Committee when we discussed this issue was that moving forward, should the SIB come back and not agree to fund the low battery, what we need to go ahead and explore doing is putting a bond issuance together in order to pay for the low battery. And we already got resources in those tax and accommodations, hospitality and accommodation funding to be able to pay that debt back. So we already have the ability to do that. So the reality of what we're dealing with is that the low battery, the good news is we've got a funding source there and we've got a way to see that project forward. What we don't have is a funding source identified yet for Spring-Fishburne. Both of them are very important and they both are priorities, but we've got to figure out a way to get these things done over time. And it's going to take, again, somebody with a really strong financial acumen to understand. And that's one of the things, Quintin, that I believe that I bring to the table, much different from the other candidates who are running for mayor, in that I've got 20 years banking experience. I've got a tremendous amount of financial knowledge and backing and understanding of how to move through very difficult and challenging situations, but also know how to accommodate the financial needs that we have for the city.
You talk about those financial needs. When you look at the city budget, say 4 years ago to right now, what do you look at?
So the budget itself, although it has grown, really the prioritization that we have established hasn't moved far enough, in my opinion, under the current administration to reflect the needs of the city. And I mean specifically around things such as maintenance of our drainage systems that we already have in place. We did, in fact, put a couple of new crews in place at the last budgeting cycle, but we still have a tremendous way to go in order to be able to actually get what we need done for our city in the future. And that's what, as mayor, one of the things I intend to do is create a fiscal mandate that ensures that we have a fiscal policy that states that on an annualized budgetary basis, by law, City Council will need to put forward a funding source and resources and appropriations to handle maintenance for our city into the future. That's going to be critical for making sure that we don't find ourselves 20 years from now in a worse place than we are today. A lot of our current infrastructure, our pipes are collapsing downtown, our outfalls are clogged up, our storm drains are clogged up, our ditches aren't being cleared out. All of these things aren't really expensive to do, but it requires a mayor who's willing to prioritize and put a mandate forward that this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it.
If you were to look at the budget today, where would you rise as far as flooding funding?
All right. So we really only have a couple of sources today for funding directly flooding, and that's through the stormwater and our drainage fund. Those are fairly limited. I mean, they're a good amount of resources, but they're not all the resources we need. So part of what we need to do is also start carving out some money within the general fund to add more resources towards and funding towards, again, maintenance and getting in more crews to be able to actually handle the maintenance for our city as a going concern, particularly around flooding and stormwater.
Hotels. According to the Post and Courier, Charleston City Council voted unanimously to give a second readings to the ordinance, which was drafted by a task force that has been working on the rule changes since May. Council could give a third and final reading Tuesday, but it opted to push the last vote until its next meeting. Waring and other council members also say they would like to see a clean copy of the rules before final approval. Several changes were proposed and approved Tuesday that require edits and additions to the language. What is your definition of a clean copy?
So thanks. That's a great. I'm really glad you brought that up, Quintin. That's really important. So the City Council has now given first and second reading approval to the hotel ordinance, and at the last reading. And so why that's important is that we have something called pending doctrine, ordinance doctrine. And what that means is that if council has given, in this case, first and second reading to an ordinance, that anybody who moves forward or comes to the city and wants to build a hotel, they currently have to operate under the expectation that those will be in place. And so they have to abide by those rules as they stand.
Okay.
So we've got that protection in place. We put that there, and now it's locked in. And so moving forward, we don't have to be concerned with groups out there who might be rushing in to do something when putting up a hotel without having to abide by these rules, because they're in place. They're there, and pending ordinance doctrine does apply. So that's number one. The second thing is we made several changes, and they weren't significant changes to the language, but there were enough changes. There were 4 in particular that required us to make some adjustments. And so we were there, and we had legal counsel saying, okay, here's what we would change it to. But when you have that many changes in a setting where you're on council chamber floors and you're trying to go through the process, it just made sense for us to say, okay, well, we all agree that these changes are what we want, and we agree with the language that's been spoken, but give us a clean written copy just to make sure that the intent of what we all believe we're voting on is in fact what we are going to vote on. So that's what the whole point was. It wasn't contentious. It wasn't about deferring or kicking the can down the road. We already had the protections in place with pending ordinance doctrine. We just wanted to make sure we had a good, clean copy so that what we all around those tables, we meaning council, believed we were voting on was exactly what we were voting on. Much better to get it right and versus having to come back and fix it later.
Jacob Lindsay, the city's planning director, also says this: the ordinance hopes to slow down development of large hotels downtown, establish a fee to pay for affordable housing, and prevent this displacement of other uses, namely offices, hotel, and retails. If you were in office today as mayor, what fee would you be looking for as far as affordable housing?
So the fee that was established within, I want to say it was $5.10 a foot is what the calculation was. And effectively what that does is it basically allows us to create a source of revenue for the housing that will be displaced, or really, quite frankly, not even be displaced, but needed for those who work within the hospitality industry. And that was really what the premise was. And I supported that, and I would support that moving forward. One of the things about affordable housing that we've got to be focused on is that we have to be able to create affordable housing in perpetuity. We can't find ourselves creating affordable housing by just saying, okay, well, Mr. and Miss Developer, if you build a project and you put 15 or 20% of that as affordable housing, but you only have to do it for 15 years. That really doesn't help us long-term solve the attainable housing problem that we have in the city of Charleston. So the city, if I'm mayor, we're going to take a much more proactive role in creating affordable housing in perpetuity. And a good example of that is the Bridgeview project that we're working on right now. I had a meeting this morning with Gianna Shell Johnson and a couple other council members, and we're getting ready to actually submit a bid where the city will acquire that site. And the city acquiring that site effectively allows us to make sure that we control, and our interest in making sure that we have affordable housing into the future are aligned with where we're putting our funding for affordable housing. I think it's a great opportunity. Hopefully we'll get it.
We'll get it. Now, if you were to talk to many people who are on housing authority right now, on Section 8 housing, what would you tell them is their future?
Right. Under me as mayor, what I would tell them is that my interest is to make sure that our community remains diverse, and it looks like it does and into the future, so that we don't continue to find ourselves gentrifying the entire peninsula. There are people who have lived in this community and these communities on the peninsula for many, many, many generations, and they should be given the opportunity to be able to continue to live in the communities that their families have grown up in. And so in order to do that, we've got to take a real serious approach to affordable housing, and that really starts with the city taking a real serious approach to looking at controlling housing overall and making it in perpetuity, not just set for a certain number of years. Because the problem that occurs is that when you have these projects that maybe roll off in 15 years after they've been affordable for 15 years, well, then what? They all go to market rate. So really 15 years is just not that long of a period of time when you really think about it. And so being able to actually control affordable housing in perpetuity so that these folks who've lived in the communities, that they stay part of these communities. And it's critical. The diversity of our community is some of the most, it's what makes us a great community. A community is great because of the diversity of our buildings and our uses. It's also about the diversity of our people, and the people who are able to live and work and play all in the same areas. And for people to be really, quite frankly, run out of the city by way of just not being able to afford to live in our community more, that shouldn't happen. In the city, as mayor, I can promise you, I will assure that doesn't happen under my watch.
And what is the current market rate for, say, Bridgeview?
It is substantial. Bridgeview, some of the math we did this morning on that project could substantiate north of $40 million for that property. The land alone, if you didn't have the deed restrictions in place and the buildings and you scraped all the buildings and get rid of them, which I'm not supporting, don't get me wrong, but the land alone is probably worth $30 million. So it is an extremely valuable piece of property, which is why when we first looked at it, I'm a member of the Community Development Committee. I have been for 12 years while on council. I've been very supportive of affordable housing all of my career on council and will continue as mayor to do so. But one of the things I would tell you is when we started having the debate about what we were going to do, it started with a group of people who said they wanted to bid on this sale of the Bridgeview and they wanted the city subsidies to go towards them as private developers. Well, that's not uncommon. That happens. But then we started to think, well, wait a minute. We've got 300 units here in downtown, and if we were to subsidize it by way of a private developer, that's great. It might add a few more years to that deed restriction, keeping it affordable for maybe 30 years instead of 15. But then what? After 30 years, then what? And that's when we really said, we need to think about acquiring this on our own. We've got a department. We know how to do it. We do it all the time. We've got great professionals that work within community development with John Shaw Johnson and her leadership. And I can tell you that I think that the best thing for the city of Charleston is to take a much more proactive approach in identifying properties like Bridgeview that allows us to create affordable housing in perpetuity so that it's always affordable. That's how we're going to be able to stem the tide of gentrification on the peninsula.
And what would be your approach, if mayor, if you had to go up to D.C. and lobby for, say, a potential Ashley River bike lane or bike bridge?
Right. So, I think the opportunity, well, particularly in Ashley Rivers, I've built relationships with Tim Scott and others up in actually, Tim Scott announced me when I first decided to run. That was back a long time ago when he was on county council, and he's been a friend ever since. So I've got relationships with folks up there in D.C. and to be able to go up, have conversations with folks, Joe Cunningham and others, to be able to find opportunities for resources so that we can do some things. Now, when it comes to Ashley River, whether or not doing it as a separate bridge, and we've had a lot of debate of what the right solution is there. I'm not sure that we've actually got to that point yet. There's some conversation about whether using the James Island Connector may be a better solution or not. But the point being is that we have to go to D.C. for funding. We have to go to the state for funding. The city's budget's $200 million on an annualized basis. That's just not enough to cover some of these very, very expensive and large projects that we need to accomplish within our city. We have to rely upon our folks at the federal and state level to help us with these funding processes. And again, the benefit of having done this now for 12 years and being on council is I've built those relationships, and I've got the ability to pick the phone, call those folks, set meetings, fly, drive, whatever it takes to be able to sit down and have meaningful conversations with those folks in D.C. who can make things happen for us.
And what type of conversation would you have with the residents of East Side about crime and its future?
Sure. The East Side is it's becoming more diverse, if you will, and there's many folks who are moving in there. They've had the shooting as of late. And there was some conversation about that there was asks of putting up wireless cameras and some other things in the community that just simply haven't happened. And what I would tell the community in the East Side is that as mayor, people need to feel comfortable in their homes. They need to feel safe. They need to feel that they can walk out onto the streets and be able to sit on their porch and converse and do whatever they need to do, or not need to do, but want to do in their community without feeling the burden of constant crime. And so I think that as mayor, what my interest be is making sure that we're very focused on these areas, particularly East Side and others, that we need to really spend some serious time, and our officers need to spend some serious time making sure we're cleaning up those areas. I think that we've got some real serious crime issues in our city, but I don't think that it's Armageddon. I think we can control it, but we've got to have a mayor who's willing to sit down and work with work with the community, understand exactly where those issues are, and then take those issues straight to our police department and say, all right, let's talk about fixing these things. What do we need to do? Here's the suggestions from the community, and really start building strong working relationships in those communities to help curb a lot of this crime that we have.
Gary White, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin Schoolhouse.
Great. Thanks, Quintin. I appreciate it as always.
Thank you.